Hi, I'm Neil Barker and welcome to my stripped down guide to the iPhone 3G straight 3GS. Essentially the same phones and they come apart the same way. So before we start, I'd highly recommend a few tools that we do on our websites. The Spudger, a very sort of world famous plastic tool, quite bendy, quite flexible, really good for getting into small areas and sort of lifting connectors. The iSesamo. Now, I couldn't rave enough about this tool, presented to us last year sometime, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's great for taking out touchscreens, getting down the sides of stuff. It's flexible, it's soft. I mean, I couldn't recommend this any higher. It's absolutely fantastic for pretty much any iPod, iPhone job you want, PC, laptop. The iSesamo, obviously, you need the small I think it's type 00 Phillips crosshead screwdriver, a pick, a small sort of pick. The Spudger can do that actually. I mean, it does the same thing, but the small pick comes in very useful as well. And also, sort of small set of tweezers as well. I mean, it also helps. So, armed with these tools, we're going to open up the 3G and the 3GS. Also, one thing I forgot to mention was the suction cup. Right, it's quite easy. These come apart. Start with the two screws. You've got two sort of crosshead screws at the bottom. I'll give them a little screw tray there. So, quite simply, unscrew these two screws at the bottom, and they're stainless, so they don't come out with any sort of magnetic screwdriver. They just got to kind of undo them as far as you can and either lift them out. Well, that one did. Maybe they're not stainless. And the second one probably going to need just tapping out. There we go. So both screws are out there. By the way, I use this tool tray because it's a nice size for the iPhone there, and also I can put the screws in the compartments around here and pretty much remember where they go. So I like to use that quite a lot. So once you've got that, the little top tip of mine is then get a bit of tape and wrap it around the top there. So you'll see why in a minute, but what happens is when you get the suction cup at the bottom of the phone there, and you're going to pull the screen back, that stops the screen from completely coming apart from the phone and tearing any connectors or ribbon cables. So once that's secured, you can also wrap your finger down there as well if you don't have the tape. And we're going to pull it. And now sometimes they come away really easy, sometimes they're quite difficult, but it's a case of wiggling it from side to side a little bit as you pull as well, and being really gentle, and there it comes apart. So with that tape, you can't just tear the screen completely off. So we can remove that tape now. That's done its job. If I can get it off my fingers, and there we go. The screen is almost like a lid. It comes up and off. Next thing we're going to do is get a little plastic spudger tool, and we're going to pop these connectors off, and they're numbered in there anyway. But before you go, you've got like a 90-degree angle there, and we're going to pop the LCD screen off. Number one comes off with not a great, not much hassle. That's quite a stiff connection. That's quite difficult to get in on the way back through. Number two comes off. That's the touchscreen. That's a little bit more sort of firm in its place. That pings off. And then number three underneath, which carries the earpiece, the sensitization cable we call it. It's the earpiece and the head detector, the sensitization proxy connector sensor. That has a tiny little bezel at the back of this very, very fragile white connector. Be very, very careful of this. You break that, there's not many places that do repair it. So we're going to flip that little bezel up there. That flips up. I don't know if you can see that if we zoom in maybe. That flips up and it allows the cable number three to just come out. You can also help it on its way by just pushing it that way. Try not to pull it up. Try and push it out and then up, because that sometimes breaks that little connector there. So that's your screen completely off. Next thing we do, obviously we're going to carry on with the phone. We've got a separate guide for splitting the screen apart, so we can refer to that when we need be. The phone itself, it's split into many different parts. We'll start off by removing the screws around the board. We're going to remove the board, we're going to remove everything pretty much. So, you see the screws down here. The 3GS has a little connector that comes up here with the aerial as well. You ping that connector off and you get to the screws. Now beneath this do not remove label, that's the warranty label, is a screw. And I know roughly where it is, so we can go in there, we can undo the screw. Obviously removing this, breaking that seal invalidates any warranty. And here we go, we're going to go round the screws one by one, dropping them in the compartments. It's quite useful because there's a few that are different sizes, and we can keep them separate then. Another screw up there, That's the sort of the main board down the right hand side. We're going to remove the camera screw and the little arm that sits over and holds the camera down as well. A little spring clip that comes off like that. We can drop that into there. Right down the left hand side, you're going to have a screw here and it holds the corner of the board down. That comes off. There's a screw mid board here. I'll try and do it so you can see it, but it's pretty difficult. And then finally there's a screw underneath that cable. So we can start popping off the little ribbon cables internally now. So number 4 we need to come off. We can get in either side all the way around the connector. It just pings off. Be careful of any chips underneath it. At the moment that little black rubber label's skewed a bit off the top, so we need to try and sort of get under there, lift the rubber off there, and then get underneath there. Mind you don't damage any chips underneath the connector as you go in, and it literally just pops off. There we go. So that comes up there. We're also going to remove these cables here. Now this little rectangle there, the silver rectangle, that's for the headphone jack and the power switch and the volume and the mute. So they're all the switch gear cables. That just pings up there. And number 6 is the Wi-Fi that runs across here. Very awkward to get on, circular connector. You want to be careful of those, they don't get damaged. So now that's the case, we can remove that last screw down here, and that should lift out and drop into there. While we're at it, we are going to want to remove the SIM dock, the SIM card holder, because that will stop the board from coming out. Now obviously you can pop your clip in there, or we can just give it a little bit of a nudge from the back, pops out and off it goes. So we've got the screws out, we've got the SIM tray out, we've got the connectors off. All the connectors are off now that need to be. But we need to lift the board out. And what we're going to do, first of all, we're going to pop the camera just so it's up a bit there, and we're going to come in from the bottom of the board and just lift it up there, and just shuffle it down a bit. There we go. I'm going to shuffle it down towards the bottom of the phone, and there we go. The logic board is now out. Camera's quite easy. If you want to remove the camera, it's just a case of a little rectangular press connector, and that pops off the back of that connector there. So we put that to one side. There's the board. You want to be careful on the things on the board. Is this little gold aerial clip. You don't want to break that or bend it too much. That is in contact with the silver bezel. That's a must, otherwise you'll lose signal quality. And these little circular connectors, like the 3G has one there, 3GS has one down here as well for the aerial and the Wi-Fi. When you come to connect it back up, be careful not to peen these over, because they're a nightmare to get back on. And that's the board. So we'll put the board to one side, and you're left with the rear assembly. Now obviously this houses the battery. Next thing we're going to do is we'll remove the battery. Now they're stuck down to the back. They have this tag here that is almost like a pull here to release the adhesive, but it invariably doesn't happen. So you can try pulling that, but it's pretty futile. So it's another case of getting under here, and just be careful not to damage the battery too much, and getting under there and just trying to peel it off. Sometimes warming the back of the actual back of the iPhone gently here and letting it soak through does release the adhesive, but the adhesive is really tough. So you have to be a little bit brutal with it. It sounds a bit awful, but it does come off. So getting on this side, making sure you don't puncture the battery, and then the battery comes out. I mean, this time it's come out with adhesive staying in the back, but sometimes the adhesive comes out on the battery, and when you get a replacement battery from us, the adhesive stays on there. So there you go. That's the battery out to one side, and you're left with the rear casing. Now the next step is, obviously, if we want to replace the vibration motor, then that is simply 2 screws. And in fact, you can do this without removing the board. It's a bit tricky, but the motor can go in. But to be honest, if you're there, you might as well sort of remove the board just to do a proper job of it anyway. So those tiny little screws come off, and the little vibration motor just kind of comes away. And there it is. 2 little gold contacts on the bottom there, touch underneath the board, and allows that little rotor head to spin. So that's the vibration motor out. Next thing is the dock connector assembly, which we call it. It's the dock connector, the loudspeaker, and the microphone as well, your voice microphone. If you've got any problems with those, then you probably need to replace that part. And of course, we do all these parts on our website, all the tools, so you've got no problem. All that's left to do now is there's a little screw underneath that connector. And that little screw comes out eventually. There we go. We'll pop that in that little corner tray there. And this lifts up. Oh no, my apologies. 2 more screws down there. There we go. Even the pros have a slight lapse. 2 tiny screws that actually hold the dot connector in there. They're really diddy. Again, doing our best to try and keep them in separate pots for the rebuild. Now those 2 screws, and finally we can lift. That lifts up. Now that lifts up, and then we're going to lift it towards the centre, inwards to there, and lifts up. As it looks like, that's that contact there has actually come away from that. I mean, that would just be out of old age probably. But there's your microphone, a little microphone for your voice. There's the dot connector ribbon cable, and then there's 2 contacts there that take it into the speaker, and that's the output for the little speaker. So that's the loudspeaker assembly with the dot connector and the microphone. We'll put that to one side. In there is, in the bottom of the casing, don't know if you can see that, but there's the little gauze bits as well. We'll lift that bracket out because we'll see if we can reattach that. And there's the gauzes. So that's the rear casing there. Last but not least, obviously, we have the power button, the headphone jack, the mute button, and the volume buttons all there needing to come out. So we'll start with the little screws on the back of the power button there. Again, they're all different sizes, so try and keep them separate, because it doesn't matter. It does matter when you screw it all back together. If you've got different length screws in, then stuff isn't going to sort of butt up properly, and buttons won't work. So those 2 come out. We'll keep those at the top, and then what we have here is the home button. The power button comes away. You can lift that off. And there's the little button and the little ribbon cable attached to it. Be really careful with these ribbon cables. And then also the power button itself pops out. You might get little tweezers on those as well. The power button comes out with its little bar on it as well. Remember, as you put it in, the bar sits down, down like that. Now, if you put the bar the other way, it won't. It stops there. Can you see that? It stops there. It won't go all the way. It won't go vertical at 90 degrees, whereas it will on the way down. And that is the way it wants to go in the phone, with the bar dropping all the way down to the bottom of the casing. So that's the power button. So the ribbon cable continues. The ribbon cable comes along here, stuck down a little bit under here, and then comes to the headphone jack. The headphone jack has a really long screw in here, so we're going to remove that. It probably needs no tweezers, but there we go, it's come out. Headphone jack then just sits back and pops out. And what happens there when we put it all this back together, I'll show you, but that headphone jack actually sits in and down underneath this metal bezel in a little groove. Going on further, the little screw there above the number 6 is the Wi-Fi kind of earthing to the casing. The Wi-Fi earthing screw takes that and that attaches or grounds it to the frame and everything, but that has to come out because that's actually on the bracket of the mute switch that will come out with this assembly. Next one is, there's a little screw in this corner. Is for the mute switch bracket on the right hand side, so that's going to come out. Again, they're so awkwardly sized screws. That one there. There's a screw that grounds this cable through down, that goes into the casing there. Essentially what you want to do, if you're stripping this all out, you just want to take every screw you can out. There you go, there's that one out. And then you're on to that's the mute switch bracket out, or unscrewed should I say, but what's holding it in is a little tab that goes underneath the volume, the button. There's 3 screws here that holds this bracket, so we'll undo these 3 here. One there. Another one in the middle. I think this is the same size. Yeah. And then one at the bottom there, and this is where it will all come apart. It should all come apart. There's these 3 screws. So what we have here now is the volume button sort of bracket will come off. So there we go. This is the case of the cable stuck down in places to the bottom, to the sort of the rear casing with this little sticky adhesive that would keep coming across. Lift that battery adhesive tab out of the way. Just gently peel the cable up. There's a volume cable, and then finally there's a small screw I missed in the corner there, holding the mute bracket down to the rear casing. Have a good look. If you've got to pull things, and you use, your strength, I think effectively something's wrong. So have a relook, have a recheck, and see there must be something holding it. It saves you breaking cases then. And there you go. There's the whole button assembly out. We'll leave that. There's so many screws in there. And there's the headphone jack assembly, and you've got the power button there, cable that comes down was the headphone jack, the mute button there on its little bracket, and the volume buttons there as well, so we can move that out of the way now. So finally, obviously the mute button itself came out. There's the little mute actuator, that can go out of the way. And finally we're left with all the rear casing and the Wi-Fi cable. Now the Wi-Fi cable is this big plastic bracket here. You come underneath it with like a plastic non-open tool. That might become where the ISSMO will come in. Again, it's glued down. It's a case of getting underneath it, releasing the glue. Maybe a bit of heat would help, and away it snaps. Just simply because it's the glue that's making a snap noise. And there you have it. There's the little Wi-Fi aerial that comes away from the back of the phone. Now what we're left with is, as you get our part rear assemblies as we sell it, obviously also there's the little SIM rocker screw. We can undo that and take that out. And there it goes, the little tweezers. Now this is a special kind of screw. It's like almost like a self-tapping screw, and then the little SIM rocker that as you press it down from the top, it rocks and pushes the SIM tray out. There you go. That's what you're left with: the rear shell, the part rear assembly that we sell. The headphone, you've got the camera lens in there, the headphone jack halo there. The volume button goes in before the bezel, so it's part of the assembly as well. So you've got the volume button still in. It's not going to come out until this bezel comes off, and this bezel obviously is all glued in place. So there you go. That's the rear assembly, or the part rear assembly as we sell it. There. So that's a complete strip down guide for the 3G, and same as the 3GS, no problem at all. And I'm Neil Barker. Thanks for watching. The next video will be us rebuilding it. Welcome to us basically putting this iPhone 3G back together after completely stripping it. Right, so we've got the part rear assembly. First things first, we're going to get the Wi-Fi cable back in there. Now this is glued down with some 3M VHB sort of adhesive gel tape, and we sell that on our site. That's going to go into place. And there's there's two circular lugs that it sits on. One there and one there, bottom corner. Once it sits on there, give it a press down, and all you need to make sure is that little metal bracket comes up and rides over that lug there. So that's essentially that is the Wi-Fi cable back in there. Next thing is really tricky, and that's the headphone jack assembly, and the volume buttons and everything. Now these are immensely difficult. So one thing I can say is if you're going to change these, on the volume button that's already in there, there's two black circular discs like tape. You need those in there. Make sure that if you're changing your cable set or anything like that, that they stay in there or they carry over, because they space the buttons properly and they won't work. The buttons just won't actuate properly if that's not in there. So you must have that. We're going to come in with assembly. It's immensely tricky to do. First thing, just drop the mute button in there. Now the mute button's going to sit in its lowest position, so probably what we need to do is reflect that in this switch here. This is the hardest bit, is putting all this in. You need a million fingers, and it's it's quite tricky, but it's not impossible. So we're going to come in with the bracket. We're going to try and slide it in there, and then engage it into the mute switch as it is in position. Put a couple of screws in just for good measure to hopefully hopefully we've got it in its position. So what we've got there, okay, put that screw in the corner and just to hold it in place really, and then we can suss out whether or not we've actually located the mute switch button properly. Right, that sits in place, and we've got a relatively firm feeling button, but I'm not entirely confident that that's in place, so it's a case of backing that screw off, sitting it down, and then doing it back up. There we go. We've got the mute switch in the low position. We know the internal switch in its low position, so I'm pretty confident we've got it there now. Next thing is we'll start putting the screws back in. The volume button bracket comes over, and we can put those three screws in, and that goes over all the other bits and bobs. So we're going to locate that in there. We're going to come in with those three small screws. Probably start with the middle one. just put it in gently, come in there with the next one. Again, what I like to do when I've got several screws on one part is put them in lightly, make sure they're all in and they're all located, and then tighten them up. So I'm happy with that. So we'll go back to the middle one, we'll tighten that up, nip that up, then nip that one up, and then nip that one. And it's always good to check as you go. So right, okay, well that's got a good feeling there. And now there's 2 screws in that bracket, I can actuate the mute button and go, you know what, that's not spongy, that feels nice and clicky, we've got it there. So I'm happy with that. Obviously the problem is finding the screws that went out even in my little pot. It's knowing where they go. So we've got a couple of screws under there. Terribly fiddly. And lots of these cables. This is the worst bit, to be honest, the reassembly of the 3G and 3GS, is this you know, it's a melee of sort of brackets and cables and screws just to get all this control set in. Probably the trickiest job as well. Let's talk about reshelling. Obviously lots of people want, you know, can I just have a new rear casing on my iPhone? It's looking a bit scratched or it's a bit cracked. Well, it's obviously they don't believe you when you tell them it's an immense job to do it. And you know, we've got part reassemblies now that have got the chrome bezel and the volume button and all the halos and everything all pre-fitted. So that's not too bad a job. It was when you're obviously quoting for a bit of labour time on replacing this whole rear section, and it's a task. So it's quite difficult to get that over to customers, but it's not the easiest thing to do. So I think what we've got in place there, we've got the mute button, we've got the Wi-Fi cables now connected up, and we're going to put the headphone jack. Now, as I said earlier, the headphone jack, see that groove there that's right in the middle there? Now the headphone jack has a receptacle here. Let's not use that. Receptacle here, and it sits in that groove and almost clips underneath there. Sometimes you put it in and it sits too high. It's because it hasn't fed underneath there. It's like it's got to go in. So we're going to slide that in now. Hopefully, all being well, then you can see it on camera as well. If we can sit it in place and just push it in and push it up without squashing too much other stuff. There we go. Push it down, then push it in, and we know that looks quite flat across the top there, and it sits all nicely, and that hole locates. You know, that's a good sign that it's there. Really long screw goes into the top of the headphone jack there, and secures the headphone jack in place. With my thumb, I'm also pushing it up as much as I can as well, just to make sure that it's in place. So that's there. The little 6 connector there. Just gonna lift it up out of the way, and there's the little grounding connector there. We're going to pop that screw just to secure that into place, and then we're going to follow it across with the power button. Okay, so that's screwed down there now. Right, bit of debris there. Okay, so we're going to follow across, lift off the adhesive. Like I said, sometimes that adhesive would be off with the battery, sometimes not. Sits under there, push that back, and then the home button. The power button, sorry, keep calling that. Just lifts up out of the way. We're going to insert that little power button there. Remember what I said about the fact that one way that bar won't go 90 to 90 degrees with the button, and the other way it will. Well, where it does go 90 degrees, the bottom bracket goes down towards the bottom of the phone. So we're just going to drop that in there, maybe with a set of tweezers just to spin it over. Also, another little top tip on this one is that these should have a little rectangular piece of black tape on the back of them, and this again spaces the button out correctly and allows it to, takes the slop out of the button and allows it to press. If you don't have that little seemingly unimportant piece of black rectangle, bit of tape, I mean it's minuscule there, the button won't actuate properly, so make sure that's in there. Next thing, once that's in place, bracket sits in over there, and there's 2 little screws that secures that to the bezel. One in the right hand side and one in the left. Okay, and then you can just not nip them up when they're in place. There we go. Always good to check, like I said. Nice clicky home button, power home button. Get me right, power button, and it's it's sat quite nicely as well. So it's all good. They have the volume cable, mute switch bracket, headphone jack, power button. There we go, got it right this time. All in place, all routed, and all sat down nicely. I made it look easy. It is easy when you've got it all pre-shaped anyway. It's probably the most difficult job on a 3G to do, but there you go, it's in place. Right, next task, we will put the vibration module back in. Quite simple, 2 screws. The middle motor head goes there, the contacts go at the bottom. It's quite simple, but it keeps sliding around. I could do with putting the iPhone down a bit, so let's try doing that. There you go, so that sits in there, and then there's 2 little screws that screw through into the bezel and just secure it in place. One there, and one there. And what has that little vibration motor spins its head, and the head has an off-center load, so all that does is just makes it shake and vibrate. It's amazing that such a small motor can do such a sort of a big job, really. So that's a vibration motor in place. Next little thing we can do is put the SIM rocker in place. Now this SIM rocker, the larger section goes towards the left, because obviously that's where you push your pin down and it rocks and ejects your SIM tray. We'll put that in place right up there, and then it's got this special self-tapping long funny shaped screw that goes with it. It's got like a little shank on the top as well. That sits in place, screws down, tightens up, and then that actuates that. So I mean, what you can do is just back it off a tiny little bit if it's pinching too much. There we go, makes that a little bit easier. So that's the SIM rocker in place. Next thing we'll look at is put the sort of the loudspeaker and docking connector and microphone assembly back in the phone. Now this slots in from the top down, and as it goes, just make sure that the little rubber section here drops into a perfectly sized recess in the phone where the gauze is. Put that in, and as you're going, there's 2 metal brackets. One of them's fallen off, unfortunately, we can't put that back in, but there's the little screw brackets either side there. They have to go on top of the bezel. So we're looking at having the little sort of receptacles go on top of the bezel, whilst that little foam mic section drops into there as well, and it all fits in nicely eventually. Once the screw holes line up, 2 there, 2 there, you're in place. So we're going to put the little screws in there. Obviously, I'll put them both in, but we know that the left-hand side the brackets come off, so that's not going to do much good. But it's better to have it in there anyway. So 1 screw there. One screw in that side, and then there's 1 screw in the corner underneath connector 4. Really tricky. It's really tricky to do with the camera in the way as well. So that one there. Now we don't need to put a screw in that side, because what happens is the screw goes through the board and clamps that down. So that's the loudspeaker assembly, all in your phone, ready to go. Next thing we're going to do is a battery. Now, with a battery replacement like the batteries we have, the genuine batteries, they come with the adhesive on there. So you tear that off, that adhesive, just pull out the back, you'd peel the adhesive, sort of the backing off, and you'd be ready to go. Now what happens is, see that circle there on the battery? That battery circle locates over that circular lug there. So you put that on there first, so it hooks over there quite nicely, and then lifting those connectors and lifting the connectors at the top, just out of the way there, the battery pushes in place. As long as you can see there that you put your finger over and it pushes it down, it's not sprung up or anything, then you're great just to literally push the battery down, make sure it's sort of level down the side, and that's it. That's the battery installed in your iPhone. Next thing we're going to do is a little contact for the vibration module's been twisted a little bit. So the battery's there. Now that's the rear assembly, partly, or pretty much there, ready for the board. Now earlier we've got the board, and we're going to install the rear camera, and that's a simple job of the little block connector on there, holding it down. You have a look on the side, you sort of find where it's happy to go, and then just give it a little bit of a push, and you get a really nice affirming click. That's in place now. So that is the board. It's assembled and it's ready to go in the phone. Now this is the tricky bit. You need your eyes and fingers everywhere. You're going to go in at that angle, almost, if I can see it side on. You're going to go in a bit like that, in and then down, minding all the connectors on the way. So first thing is you're going to get this SIM junctor in place. You're going to slide it down underneath, lifting the camera up at the same time, lifting those connectors up at the same time. There's so much to think about, but you lift those up, you lift the camera up, and this slides down, and what happens is the board actually goes underneath. Let me see if I can show you. A black clip just out next to the headphone jack there is like a little barb clip. It goes underneath there, and the top of the board, as you slide it in, goes underneath that little black bit there, and it goes underneath it. So we're pretty much there. It's underneath that clip and that clip there, but you're not going to press it down, because at the moment we've got number 4 in the way, and on the 3GS you've got another cable that sits in the way here. So it's a case of lift number 4 out of the way, push those in with your thumb, pushing the board forward, and then it just sits down quite nicely, quite snugly. There's a little pin there, and there's a little pin down here that the board just literally locates on. Once they're on there, you know it's all good. If you've got to really force it, there's something wrong. So let go, take it out, have a rethink, because if you have to force anything on these, you're going to break it. Simple as that. So that's the board in place. We're going to put a couple of screws in place now, starting with the long sort of non-shank screw that goes through that sort of guarantee label, the warranty label. That should just hold it in place. Right, that screw's in place. Another thing to watch is that little gold connector, that little spring clip. You've got to make sure it's not underneath this metal bit, it's actually resting nicely against it. That'll give you good signal then. So we'll work our way around with the screws on the board now. Because they've located on those little lugs, those little pins, we pretty much know that there's no real need to do them loosely, then go round them again. But if you want to, it's good practice really. I'm just trying to save a little bit of time as we go. There we go, a little screw. Magnetic screwdriver is really quite handy. Right there. Next thing we do, we're going to push the camera in. So you're going to push it in towards the board a little bit that way, and then down. And it gives it a nice little clip, and it sits in there quite comfortably. And then you've got this bracket with the screw that goes through. It just kind of puts a little bit of pressure on the camera. Really quite tricky. You can't do this with the shakes, or a night after a night with you on your beer or something, because you'd be all over the place. Right, so that little screwdriver comes in there, the little bracket holds the camera down. There. So we'll work our way around again with the screws, and we'll go down the left hand side of the phone. Just needs a little bit of a press down there. As I noticed when I was screwing this, or about to screw this in, that it was lifted up slightly proud, and what had happened was it had just risen above that little barbed clip there, so I just needed, because it's a little barbed clip, you can push it down and it kind of is like a non-return thing. So right, that screw's in place now. Come on, there we go, the next one. Our mid-board screw. And then finally the bottom board screw underneath connector 4. Perfect. So they're all the screws in the board apart from the 2 bottom ones, and that little bracket obviously that we can't put in again. So there's the board in place. Now we're going to start to connect it up. It's quite a straightforward job. Takes a little bit of patience, but first thing first. Number 4, now we can refit that rubber bit on top of that connector. Because they've been in there anyway, they kind of know their location, so it's a case of just literally gently settling the cable down to roughly where it's going to be, and just finding it with your thumb, finding a location, then pressing it and getting that nice affirmative click like that. Same one with that one, number 5, sit it down, give it a little bit of a wiggle with your thumb, you find out where it's happy, then give it a final press. Now number 6, and also I think it's number 7 down here on a 3GS, is really tricky. They're circular. Now it's good to get a good angle at it, have a look with your finger, and literally there's not much room for error, for a margin for error, should I say, and it's a case of having a good look down there, finding where you are before you even start to put any pressure on, and if you get it somewhere near and locally, it does give a nice little click on. If you try and force it thinking it's anywhere near and it's not, you will peen it over, and you're into a world of pain then. You're into trying to reform the little circle and all sorts. They are so fragile, so be really careful with those, folks. Same with the 3GS one that's down there as well. Once you've lost those, you're going to lose your signal and your aerial integrity. Next thing, the SIM card tray, obviously, that slots in without a problem. Nice and flush, sits in there okay. Perfect. So there's your iPhone 3G and 3GS assembled, ready for your screen. Now your screens as they go, I mean we've got a separate video for the screen, but we can remove that suction cup now. As they go, the trickiest part is this one, is that cable number 3. Now what I do is tend to hold that in one hand, tend that in there, hold that in the right, and come in and just have that cable exposed, and come at an angle, come at like a diagonal angle, because if you come down that way you won't be able to get in, because that phone cable, there's a little cutout in that cable, the camera. So we're going to come in at a slight angle into that receptacle, and then we're going to come on round and just give it a little bit of a wiggle until all the gold contacts are hidden inside the connector. Then with your finger, very lightly, we're going to just run our finger down backwards on that little plastic retaining clip and push it back and down. You don't just want to rip it backwards. Do it with the utmost care on this connector, because if you break this connector you're in a world of pain. So I know, I'm quite happy pressing that down, that's good. So we'll put it on the deck now. Now the digitizer connector, cable 2, comes over. Again, you're rubbing it with your finger to try and find where it's happy. It almost finds its own way, and then once you're there, big push, nice click, that's it. LCD connector is the last one. What you're after then is it comes over, and what you're looking to do is that white line there, as you can see, lines up with the edge of this silver shield there. So you're looking to line it up there. Again, this one's been in. It's more, when they haven't been in place before, then they're quite a little bit more tricky. But again, find with your finger roughly where it is, and give it a little bit of a press. Now the LCD never really has a really affirmative click, but you know when it's in place. What I would do as well, a little trick as well, because they have that will spring up. If I lift that up a bit more, that will spring up because it's quite a tight cable. Is keep my finger on it whilst positioning the screen with that hand, like so. Keep my finger in there, and then right into the last minute where you're happy with the screen's in place is literally remove your hand. You've got the phone like that, and it's just a case of keep putting the little black plastic tab that's in place in there, and then just pushing the whole assembly, keeping your finger on there, because if you push that down that will pop up. Keep your finger there and then just ease it into place, push it down, and there we have it. So that's the iPhone pretty much in situ. It's rebuilt. This is as flat as you like, so I'm not going to get it to power up, but essentially that's all to do, and the last thing you need to do then is just refit the 2 screws in the bottom. That's one screw. And there's the second. So those 2 screws go in place on the iPhone, and there you have it, a fully assembled or disassembled, then reassembled iPhone 3G and 3GS. I'm Neil Barker. You can find on our websites all the tools and the parts you need. Thanks for watching.